So, welcome to another episode of the Venari Podcast. As part of our HealthTech CEO series, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Cal Patel, CEO and founder of BrightInsight. Welcome to the Venari Podcast, Cal.
Thanks for having me, Christian.
Brilliant. No doubt we will at some point kind of dive into BrightInsight. But before that, I just wanted to give us a little context and go more into your early life. And would you consider yourself a born entrepreneur?
No, I never actually thought about being an entrepreneur, as a child or frankly, early in my career. And that was actually something that sort of borne out over the last 10 years or so. So definitely did not embark with that in my original DNA.
Because I know that, obviously we've known each other for some time, and, you had a pretty enviable life, didn't you? Kind of before founding BrightInsight. Great job with Amgen, life in California, time with the kids, etc. Why did you give all that up, basically, to start a company?
So yeah, I was working at Boston Consulting Group for many years, as you know, and then was at pharma at Novartis and then at Amgen, and all those experiences were actually, I would say, enviable and fantastic, and learned a lot and had a great impact in all three places. At Amgen, when I left for entrepreneurship, left from Amgen, I'd founded and was leading the digital health group at the time, and that's what really opened my sort of an internal entrepreneur role, if you will, within the company. But that really opened my eyes to what was really happening from a technology perspective, because I never saw myself as a savvy user of technology. I've never taken an engineering class in my life. I don't know how to code. But what was obvious to me was that technology was already, and this is a decade ago now, mature enough to have a tremendous impact on healthcare, and we were really seeing very little of that actually come through in the real world, and even less than that at scale. So seeing that really, struck a chord in me around, what felt like just such a huge opportunity to have impact. And that has been something, I guess, that's been with me for a long time, since my early days, is sort of a desire to work on really interesting problems that, with great people that can have huge impact. And that's what I saw, in terms of the technology side, and specifically, going down the path of ultimately the entrepreneur side, and maybe sort of a bit of, the personal side to, I think, what you were inferring in your question. Look, I think for, that view, like, we have one life to live, and life, you want to make the most of that. And you really, don't want to be looking back on what you with regret on too many things. And I think I genuinely believe in this notion of people more often end up regretting the paths not taken versus the paths taken. And again, Amgen, is fantastic. And I have lots of great friends and colleagues still there doing great work. But for me personally, just saw the opportunity to do something very different, to learn in a very different environment, to have impact in a very different way. That was something I just felt I would really regret if I didn't jump into and try.
On that, really, I mean, you mentioned kind of, I suppose, jumping out of Amgen and obviously starting BrightInsight, but why BrightInsight? Maybe tell us a bit about BrightInsight as a company, what it is you do and what kind of separates you, I suppose, from your competitors.
So the idea for BrightInsight actually comes from the Amgen experience. My two co-founders come from that same team. And what we were doing was thinking about, how do we leverage technology to improve the real world performance of our drugs, right? So, like other pharma companies out there, we were building, we were doing the research and then commercializing these amazing therapies that had, tremendous impact on different diseases, different patients and families' lives. Yet, I don't think any drug gets the full world impact of what the medicine can do. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Some of those very important reasons could actually be meaningfully addressed by leveraging technology. And so that was really kind of the core at what we were doing at Amgen with the digital health group. But one of the things that we learned through our progress, our successes, our failures, was that to do this type of innovation in pharma and medical device companies, obviously operating in the regulated space. And, we could have POCs, but when you think about scale and taking that scale across patients, across different types of, let's say, diseases or drugs, across different countries, that was a really formidable challenge that pharma, frankly, wasn't well equipped to tackle. And so what we saw was this future where not just what we were doing at Amgen, but across the board, there'd be a much larger leveraging of technology wrapped around drugs. And we wanted to be that infrastructure provider to be able to do that in a compliant way, right? So the whole notion of the company was, how do we bring the complexity? How do we bring the activation energy required? How do we bring the cost and effort required to do digital health innovation at scale for a pharma or medical device company? And so we built the infrastructure for that. And so today, BrightInsight works with, the majority of the top 10 companies and others that are not in the top 10 across pharma and medical device companies. Our customers, range from working with us from ultra rare diseases and rare diseases all the way through to, some of the most common illnesses, out there. So really that whole spectrum. And it's various pain points, but what's common is these pain points are fundamentally leveraging a common technology stack that we've built. And that, from day one, is all about regulatory compliance, so meeting the most stringent requirements in 64 countries from a regulatory compliance perspective, as well as, the quality side of things. And then importantly, also data privacy, data security. Yeah. So an analogy I use is, or an example I use is, when I was, again, in pharma myself, most pharma companies were building their own private clouds, because they had sort of this notion that was the better, safer, more robust way to do it. And now I think, there's a massive shift, right, towards, the large cloud providers, because people recognize, well, one of these large cloud providers might be employing 5,000 security people, right, versus how many you're going to employ at a single pharma company, right? And so you start thinking about any aspect of this, and you're going to just, get a specialist partner to enable you way faster than trying to do it yourself. And that's the core focus of the company, and that's what we've stayed true to since the beginning.
You guys obviously had rocket ship success and then also challenges as well. How have you managed to sail through these choppy waters? Why is BrightInsight still kind of running well, basically?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So, as you said, look, we've had lots of progress and successes. I mean, we did our Series A financing about 4 years ago, and I kind of think back to what the company was then and what we're at now. It's just completely night and day from, customer base perspective, from a product perspective, from a user perspective, proof points, et cetera. So certainly, we've had, good run on progress, but to your point, a lot of learnings, setbacks, wins, probably, it's all of that, right? But you kind of want to know kind of ideally, day to day, or you're moving forward more than you are, sometimes going sideways or backwards. I think for us, a couple of things I would point to in terms of, to your point around what have we done to try to navigate as effectively as we can. Number one comes back to your earlier question. We've been really focused, right? I think a lot of digital health companies got too fragmented or too, broad in the problems they were trying to tackle. And I think the problem we're trying to tackle is complex enough that we weren't trying to tackle, more than one complex problem, right? And so we're really focused on how do you build, these type of companion apps, et cetera, that ultimately over time, either start with needing regulatory or maybe, evolve to that, right? And so I've been very focused on serving that platform capability. And what that means is we've been spending heavily on R&D around that, right? So again, 4 years ago, I kind of described the company as having a compliant, but not very intelligent platform. So we had the basics of a very compliant infrastructure. We put $100 million of R&D over the years into our products. So now we have an incredibly robust, configurable products on top of our platform. And so that means for pharma companies and in vitro diagnostic companies in the medical device space, they're getting something that saves them a tremendous amount of time to market. It's super robust when they kick the tires on it or look for proof points. And, we've gone up the learning and experience curve of building that tech, seeing what worked, what didn't work, what we needed to tweak, et cetera, right? So it's a culmination of, I think, again, being very focused and then learning from our execution, right? Learning from what worked and learning from what didn't work. And then, I think the third part I would say is, the culture here. The culture here is very mission driven, and I think when we talk a lot about that the work we're doing is extremely hard, and there's going to be days that feel like punches in the gut or tough, or you don't want to get out of bed, and it's like, what do you tap into at that point, right? And I think for us, we tap into our mission, and frankly we tap into each other. right? And we lift each other up, and we challenge each other, but also lift each other up through that, right? So I think it's a combination of those things. But look, I will say the macro environment, and specifically, what's happening within healthcare and kind of the demands that pharma and medtech have, I think have really ratcheted up the bar on their digital partners. I think that's just made us stronger, right? It's forced us to even get even more focused, tighter on our execution, be better partners, et cetera, right? So I think the challenging environment has been good, good for us, and then good for the overall ecosystem.
My final question, really, Cal, would be: do you have any advice for future founders?
Yeah, I think we need like 10 podcasts for that. Not that I'm saying all my advice is spot on. Well, one is you actually should get advice from a portfolio of people. I mean, I think if I think of myself, I have a broad set of really trusted network, and that's a combination of the obvious stuff like board members and stuff, but I have other entrepreneurs within healthcare, but many that are actually not in healthcare. Mentors that have retired, have built companies, and have gone through the process and the successes and the failures, et cetera. I have people I really connect and recharge with on the sort of the mental, emotional side of things as well. So I think having kind of a broad network is actually really important, because being an entrepreneur actually can be a very lonely job, because you sort of feel the weight of the team, the company, your investors kind of on your shoulders. So I think having a set of folks that can give you different perspectives that you can then digest and get your own point of view on is an important piece of advice. And I think a lot of folks think they need to have all the answers, and so I would certainly advise against that. I think the second point I would really highlight is this. Personally, I think it really needs to be something that you are just extremely passionate about, because doing this is extremely hard. And the sacrifices you make, not just from sort of hours put in and kind of the emotional strain, but most people who are successful entrepreneurs, they have alternatives to make a really great living doing something else, right? And so kind of on all aspects, it's a massive trade-off, and it's going to be really challenging. Very few companies in the history of companies being built are truly that sort of one directional rocket ship. And you look at every successful company out there, they have many stories of near brink death or other challenges that they navigated almost at all stages. And so the resilience requires extremely high, right? And so I think the way you tap into that resilience is that you just have a fundamental passion about what you're doing, and you really believe that doing that's just so important to the world and important to yourself that not just on the good days, but on the toughest of days and weeks, you still can tap into that resilience. And then the third thing I'll say is, nothing goes according to what you planned, whether it's your pitch deck, your board deck, your annual plan, your quarterly plan. And so you got to come back to having the right team. Right. And so if you have the right team, you have the right people, kind of on the bus, as Jim Collins says, like that's, requirement number one, right? You guys have a common vision, common set of values, because everything else fundamentally, there's going to be so many unknowns, but if you can get that right, then you're best equipped to, kind of make the right choices and navigate and execute, against your plans as best as, the real world kind of brings them to you.
No, thanks, Cal. I appreciate you, talking about BrightInsight there, and fantastic advice, and absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. And look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I appreciate you having me, and great to reconnect.